This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Any questions, guys? Anyone? Any questions from the yesterday's class? Anything that I can before we can get started with today's session out here? Anyone? Anything? Can guys, if you do not have a question, I would request you all to please stay on mute and you can switch off your cameras. We don't need the cameras out. So please switch off your cameras and please stay on mute. If you have a question, please unmute yourself and I can answer it out. And today's class is mostly, let's say, online. I don't have an offline batch just for today. We resume the offline batch from tomorrow. I just want to give that particular heads up out to you all. So let's come back and let's revisit what we were doing yesterday. So yesterday I was telling that there is a service called a storage account, which will help you, let's say, host or which will help you save the data which is unstructured in nature, and we are talking about a couple of things. So let's revise those things and let's come back here. We were first telling what all you need, and of course you'll need a tenant, you need a subscription, you need an RBAC, meaning role based access control out here. And guys, please stay on mute if you're not speaking. There are a lot of people I see are on unmute. Please stay on mute. I'll talk about I'll Yeah, and one more question is that what is LR ZRS? I'll talk about that. Let's say wait for a second and we'll talk about that. Please unmute out here. I'm getting a little bit of echo, so please unmute. Javed and Swati, you can go and mute out here. All right, so let's come back and let's see. So need a tenant, we need a subscription, we need an our role-based access control, and we need a resource group. So we need all these resources, we need all these things to be in place to create any resource in Azure, and this is what we're talking yesterday. Talking about a storage account service and storage account service, and we are telling that storage account service is someone which can hold unstructured data which is, let's say, which is a PDF file, which is, let's say, an Excel file, or let's say a Word document or a video or an image, anything in the form of something called as a blob, binary large object. So when we call a file, Azure just calls it as a blob out here, binary large object out here. This is what it does. This is what it stores out here. And when we were creating the storage account service, first thing we were looking at is the naming convention, and naming convention follows something like this. It is 3 to 24 characters in length. It should be unique in nature, and it should be, let's say, or it cannot have any special characters. So this is the naming convention we were looking at. Then we were telling what is the significance behind a region selection or a location selection. Like, why do you create a storage account in East US2 and not probably, let's say, in West US? Why do you want to create it in Central India and not probably East US? And we were looking at a couple of factors like the proximity, or how close is that particular storage account to the point of origin of your business. That is the first thing that we were looking at. And then we were telling how geographically and how politically stable a particular region is, which impacts all these factors of decisions and etc. And you cannot neither change the name nor the location of a storage account after you create it. So this is where we are. Again, if I just go into the Azure portal, if I just click on something called storage account service, I can start creating one. I don't really have one, so I can say create. You can also click here, you can go to storage services out here. There are a couple of things called storage account, or you can just go ahead and type for storage accounts. You can do it in any which ways. And let's come back again. Let's see. So select the subscription and select the resource group in which you want this. So subscription, I'll say it's a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. This is the only thing that I do have. And resource group, I can just say some random resource group, or if I don't have one, I can create one also from here. So if I don't have a resource group, I can just say demo rg storage, something like this. I'll say okay. I'll also end up creating the, let's say, resource group out here along with the storage account. You don't have to separately create a resource group and then create one, or then create a storage account out here. There's a create new option out here. You can just go ahead and create a resource group out here as well. So I'll just scroll down. There is something called the instance details right now. It's telling what is the name, what is the location, and all these things out. So again, as I said yesterday, it should be unique in nature. So I will give something like dev, the team for which I'm creating this, Uber, the project for which I'm creating this, service called storage, region U2, I'll say 00, something like this. But the name can be, or the name should be unique. Again, I'm picking up a region, something like ECS2. I'm saying, okay, fine, this is the storage account that I want to create in ECS2 or Central US or whatever it is. Whatever it is, depending upon all the factors that we were looking at yesterday. And today, one more concept that I want to introduce is something called as a performance tier. There is something called performance out here. Now, what do I mean by performance? Again, just to give you a very high level overview of it, there is a storage account and we want to save some data into this particular storage account. And when you store the data here, ideally, this particular data is written, or this particular data is stored in a backend data center. There is a data center that Microsoft has created for you. There's something known as a data center out here. I'll just put it as DC. Nothing but a, let's say, a room which hosts a lot of servers. And now I'm telling that whenever you write a data or when you start storing a data, Azure will go into this particular backend data center, into a server of the backend data center, create some space and start storing your data out here. Now the question Azure is asking is, do you want a standard performance server or do you want a premium performance server? Again, just to compare it with the physical world that we have, if you go to a shop and say that, you know what, I want to buy a laptop, the first question the shopkeeper will be asking you is that, do you want a laptop with HDD hard drive or do you want a laptop with SSD solid state drive? If you've been to a, let's say, a shop out there, this is the first question they would kind of ask you out there. Do you need an SSD or do you need, let's say, something like HDD? Out of curiosity, if you may ask, what is, let's say, the difference between HDD and SSD? The shopkeeper will tell simply that premium data drives or premium SSDs out there, sorry, or SSDs out there, which is solid state drive, they are faster in nature when compared to HDD. So the rate at which you save the data. So in a very simple terminology, when I say save the data, if you copy the data from one destination to the other, it's very fast in a SSD. It's a little slow in HDD. Microsoft is asking the same thing. Is that how exactly or what kind of a tier you need? Is it a standard tier or is it a premium tier? And if I click on premium tier, again, there is a different account type that you get. Again, there's something called blog file and etc., which we will explore once we get inside it. So it's telling recommends for scenario that requires least latency, standard, very commonly used option. It's telling these things out here. Very importantly, you cannot change this as well after you create it. Very important to note. You cannot change the name, one thing, location, second thing, third thing is the performance. These are a couple of things that you cannot really change after you create a storage account. So you cannot create a storage account and say, you know what, accidentally I created it in standard, I wanted it in premium. You cannot do that. Again, the pricing structure is also different. So if I come back into the Azure pricing calculator, so yesterday we were doing something called Azure pricing calculator out here. So if I come down to this one, and if I click on the service called storage account out here, and if you look at it, it's telling there is a storage called blah blah and all that stuff. I'm interested in something called tier. And just look at the price. Let's firstly remove a couple of things. Yesterday also I added a lot of things out here, so I'll just remove all these things out here firstly, so that the price doesn't get impacted. So there are about 3 particular storage accounts that I added. I'll add one more. Just go here and let's see this. And let's change this pricing to Indian National Rupees. It's right now in dollars. So let's change this to Indian National Rupees and let's understand the base price of it. I'm just looking at the base price. We'll talk about what happens and all that stuff. So it's 1613 rupees, meaning it's 1613 rupees out here for a storage account that is sitting in a region called, let's say, ECS2. For ECS2, it is slightly less, which is 1427. And if I change this tier to premium, do you see what happens out here? So if I just scroll down, let's see where is that. Yeah, your estimate. If I just scroll down, do you see the base price itself is getting changed? Like if I have it in standard, there is a price of around 1427 rupees out here. This is the base price what I'm getting charged. But if I go to premium, it's almost 10 times more than what the base price is. Premium is very costly. Premium is very costly. So the performance is also very enriched. You get a very, let's say, superior performance out here when compared to the standard, because premium storage accounts are backed with, let's say, servers that have, let's say, solid state drives hosted on them. So the rate at which you write the data and the rate at which you retrieve the data. So write in the sense copy, retrieve as in, let's say, copy the data again back into your local machine, all these things. It's very fast. It's really fast out there when you go for premium. But most of the clients that we worked use a standard. We'll also talk about why they use a standard, what is the advantage for going a standard versus a premium, what is the performance impact that you get, and all these things out here. So yes, any questions still here on what is a performance tier and how do you select that and all these things out? Any questions still here?
Hi, sir, this is Sai Kiran.
Good, please.
Sir, when we use the premium and the standard, what type of depends on project or our storage?
Again, it depends upon the use case, as I can completely, if I say it depends upon the use case out here. If you are a project or if you are an application that which needs a very fast, let's say, data retrieval and very fast data transfer, you
Okay,
would go for a premium tier as such. Let's say if you are a project who says, okay, fine, you know what, this is my internal storage account, this is the storage account for my employees, they are going in and saving data. And if I am okay, if the data speed is not that great, meaning again in a premium and a standard, yes, you will have a difference, but standard also works well. Like, when the data transfer and all that happens, it works well. It's not that fast, but it works well. So if you are okay with that particular performance tier, then yes, you can go for, let's say, something called as a standard out there.
okay.
Okay, good
And one more
question.
question, sir.
V2. Yeah, good, please. Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
So as you said before, we have a 500 TB maximum storage
Correct,
account.
correct.
So, for example, that's only for resource group only, or else total portal.
No, it is for a region. So when I say that, let's go back into the home screen. Let's understand what really happens out here. So let's go here. So let's go into something called subscriptions. In my subscription, if I go into subscription, anyone has this one. So this is my subscription. If I just scroll down, there is something called usage plus quota. So each and every subscription will come with its own usage. Each and every subscription will come with, let's say, its own quota limit out here. And in here, I'll just say the resource that I'm looking at is a storage account. I'll just switch this to storage account out here. And if you see here, right, the, let's say, okay, it's not, let's say, getting expanded, but yes, if I just hover around it, in this subscription, in this region, I can create around 250 storage accounts. So it is not per a resource group, it is per an account completely. And each and every storage account out of these 50, let's say I can create 250 storage accounts out here, and each and every storage account amongst these 250 can have 500 terabytes each. So the 500
Okay.
terabyte capacity is per a storage account. So let's say if you have a resource group, let's say you create 250 storage accounts in that particular resource group, still possible. Each and every storage account can have a maximum capacity of 500 terabytes. So this is what it's
Yes.
saying. Create a cloud storage about 500 terabyte data in the cloud as such. All right. So I'll
Hi,
just take
Kiran.
one question. Yeah, good, please.
Yeah, you told me that if we can't change the storage name and the reason and the performance, right?
Correct.
But there is a chance to delete a storage. You created the storage, no, that you can able to delete or not.
Yes, you can definitely delete it. Like any resource in Azure is deletable. You can definitely
Oh,
delete it.
okay, thank you.
Hey, hi, Kiran. If you're using the, I have used the standard account for 2 days. After that,
Okay.
I have upgraded for premium.
hmm
There's any possibility?
Again, as I said earlier, you cannot upgrade your account. You cannot switch the performance tier from a standard to premium. That is not allowed. So let's say after 2 days you realize that okay, fine, I need a premium. Then you'll have to delete the earlier storage account or create a new storage account, transfer the data, and delete, let's say, the older storage account out there. So the switch of that particular performance is not allowed at all.
Thank you.
Okay, and there are a couple of questions in the chat window also. I'll just take that. First question is like, what does V2 mean? Guru, V2 means version 2. I'll talk about that too. Just coming down. And if we purchase storage, we must be any login credentials. Firstly, you are not purchasing a storage, you are renting a storage service out there in the Azure portal. And for me to rent it, I am first logged in. So I at least need a login credentials. I need all these things. That's the reason I started with this. Telling tenant subscription, RBAC, and then let's say resource group. So I need all these things to go ahead and let's say start to create a storage account out there. Again, someone was asking what is a general purpose V2? Like what exactly do you mean by V2? Now V2 is called a general purpose version 2 accounts. Everything that you create right now is a version 2 account. Meaning now if you just look at the history of the Azure portal, Azure let's say started in 2010, 11 and those times out there. And before let's say something, or let's say when they started, when let's say Azure started with something called version 1. There was a version 1 storage out there, which is also called as a storage classic, which is not being used a lot these days, but there are still a couple of customers who are using it. And storage account classic had a lot of limitations, meaning if I'm creating this out, you cannot automate the creation, you cannot use any scripting to create it. And there's also a limitation, let's say, in the storage capacity of it. You cannot really store more than let's say 100 terabyte of data and all these things out. So there is something called storage v1. And how do you create a storage v1? If you need to, do you see this option? It says if you need to create a legacy storage account, click here. And if I click here, it will help me create a legacy storage account called general purpose v1, version 1 of the storage out there. So you can switch alternatively between version 1 version 2, but the recommended out here today, when you look at it, it's version 2 as such. So version 2 are the latest storage accounts that come with let's say a greater capacity, a better performance, and also it'll give you let's say something on the automation side of it, meaning you can use some kind of a programming or some kind of a scripting language to start interacting with your storage service as such. Does that answer your question, Guru?
Hello. Yeah, hi Kiran.
Good, please.
Yeah, you created your storage account and some credits are debited from your 10,000 credits, right? Something 9,000 I
Correct.
saw in your account.
hmm
If I
No,
delete
that's not
this
for
again,
the storage account. Yeah, it's not for the storage account. I created some other resources. Yes, go ahead, please. But yes, go ahead.
okay, if I create storage account, some credits will debited, right?
Definitely. Yes, definitely.
So if I delete again, the same credits will credit.
So again, same question to you. You have recharged your mobile phone. You spoke to someone. There were some rupees that got debited. You cut the call. Will it come back? No,
Okay.
right?
So
Same
okay,
thing.
okay, right, right. So if
Same
you
thing.
delete it, it's no use.
No use. Nothing. I mean, if you
Okay.
delete it, I mean, what will happen? If you delete it, is that the future credits will be stopped. Meaning you have 10,000. I created today. I got around, let's say, 100 rupees of credit. I mean, there was
So
something
we
around 100
paid
rupees.
rent like that, credits.
Exactly. You paid rent for that particular day.
And we
And
came
for
out from
future,
that.
yes, you came out from that, so that from tomorrow you don't pay the rent.
Okay, got it.
Something of that nature out there.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
Again, I'll,
Hi, Kiran.
yeah, hi, go ahead, please.
I mean, what are the redundancy options we have here, like redundancy, LRS, and other
Again,
options?
firstly, let's talk about what really redundancy means. That's what I'm coming down to.
Okay.
Let's talk about what really is redundancy. That's what is my next topic, and we'll understand why we need something called redundancy, what is redundancy, and then the different redundancy options out there,
Yeah, sure.
which I'm going down to. Yes, which I'm coming down to. Very, very importantly, redundancy or replication. Quite important, very important when you create a storage account service. Replication out here. Now, what do you mean by redundancy? What do you mean by replication out here? Is replication is nothing but copy of your data. So you are using a storage service on the cloud. So there is a storage service that is there on the cloud. You're taking, let's say, a lot of files, very important files from, let's say, your different devices, and you're storing all that particular data inside the storage account that is running inside an Azure cloud out here. Now, one question that I would like to ask Azure is that, you know what, when I create a storage service, this particular storage service is hosted out of, let's say, a data center, and then there is a server out here. There is in the backend, there is a server. Now, my question to Microsoft is that what if this server crashes? What happens if that this is a physical server? It is attached to different power cables, it has routers and it has switches and all that stuff. What happens if the server is not available? Microsoft will simply say that your data will be not available. Then I ask Microsoft, then what is the guarantee? What kind of, let's say, precautions are you taking so that my data is available? And Microsoft tells that, you know what, to answer that, you will have to look at something called as the redundancy documentation. That's where I'll go to. So I'll just click on this documentation. I'll just click on redundancy, say I, and I'll go to something called learn more out here. This is where, or this is what brings me to something called Azure Storage Redundancy. So this is what it's telling me. It's telling Azure Storage always wants to store multiple copies of the data from planned events and all that stuff and etc. Meaning it's telling in the events of failure, or in, let's say, in the case of failure, you should have multiple copies of your data so that the data is always available out there. But what kind of an options Azure offers is, let's scroll down, and the very first option Azure offers is something called locally redundant storage, LRS. There are a list of options that Azure has, the list of things that Azure has out here called locally redundant storage, LRS out here, and this is what it tells you. It says LRS replicates your data three times, let's say, or thrice inside the same data center. Meaning what it does is that inside a data center, there are multiple servers out here. They're not one, not two, but thousands of servers that are available out here inside the same data center. Again, this data center is hosted out of a region called ECS2. This is something that we need to understand. So Azure is telling that, hey, you know what, if you go for something called LRS, which is locally redundant storage, the moment you create the first copy, the moment you put a blob here, let's say you put a blob here, or let's say you put a PDF file or something like that, which I'm calling now a blob, I will give you not one, but three copies of your data. I will replicate it thrice: primary, secondary, and tertiary. So now back to your question, if this particular server is not available, then what is the future, or what is, let's say, the guarantee that my data is available? Microsoft is telling that, you know what, if the server is not available, if the primary server is not available, your data can still, or the data is still saved in the secondary and the tertiary server. That's what it's telling you. So if you just scroll down, it's telling there is something called primary region. There's a data center in the primary region. There's a storage account service. There's a copy 1, copy 2, and copy 3. Three copies of your data are being, let's say, created. And my question is that, okay, I understand this, but what is your guarantee that my data will be available? Microsoft tells you that this is the guarantee: 99.9999, so on to 11 times 9, meaning out of every 100 times, these many times is something what your data is available out here. These many times is something that the data is really available out there in a given year. Meaning in a given year, your data might not be available for 0.9, 0.0000 something one out there. 11, let's say, one out there out of every 100 times. These are the times that the data will be available. And I also ask one more question is that, yes, you're telling me that you create 3 different copies. My question now to Microsoft is that, you know what, I go ahead and upload the first copy today. I just go ahead and let's say upload one of the copies today, the second at around 8:29 a.m. IST. I ask Microsoft, when will the copy 2 and copy 3 will be available? Microsoft tells you it will be available in the same second. This is called a synchronous replication. Synchronous, happening at the same time. A synchronously replication thing. I mean, a synchronous replication which happens in the same time out there. This is what Microsoft really talks about. This is locally redundant storage, LRS, wherein you get 3 different copies out here. Now, my question to Microsoft is that, great, this is good. You're giving me a 99.99 and etc. But what if the entire data center goes down? So I created ECS2. There is a data center in ECS2 that got allocated. What if the entire data center goes down? Microsoft says that's the reason I have one more redundancy type called ZRS, which is zone redundant storage. And can I, let's say, if you create a storage account in LRS, can you change it to ZRS? Definitely yes. You can change the storage account tier, or you can change the redundancy to, let's say, from one tier to the other. You can do that. This is allowed to be changed. So Microsoft says, okay, fine. If you want a better data availability, or let's say a better disaster recovery plan, go for ZRS out here, which will give you 3 copies of your data, one in each zone. What do I mean by one in each zone out here is this. Now I'm talking about an entire Azure region. ECS2, I'm talking about an entire Azure region out here. ECS2, again, if you look at the geography, it's the entire coastline of the United States. Like, it's the entire eastern side of the United States. There you can have multiple data centers, not one. You can have multiple data centers in different cities. So Microsoft is now telling you that, okay, fine, I'll give you 3 copies of your data, not in the same data center, but in 3 different data centers out here. 1, 2, and 3, which, let's say, are connected to each other but separated by, let's say, the physical separation out here. So you have 3 different data centers out here that are coming into picture, and it's telling, okay, fine, you know what, I'll give you 3 different copies of your data. Again, happens synchronously.